everybody. My name is Kelley O'Donovan from First Intuition, and this session is going to be on revision techniques. So thank you very much for joining me. Now, the session I'm going to focus on today is thinking about how do we make it stick? How do we get that knowledge into our brains so it goes from really the short-term memory into what we really need, which is it to go into the medium-term memory, so that yes, we can remember it for the exam, but with AAT, as you guys will know, the AAT have got this beautiful thing called the synoptic exam at the end of every level that then requires us to remember the stuff we did in our prior units. So now it's even more important that our knowledge isn't just in the short term to get through, say, a bookkeeping transactions exam. We need it to stick into more of the medium or ideally longer term memory, not just to pass the synoptic exam, which might be 6 months or 9 months or 12 months after you having sat that core unit, but also for our longer term career success. So I'm going to take you through some techniques and ideas that I have researched, and there was a really good book which is referenced at the end, and it was called Making It Stick, and I did a bit of research on it and found it included some really useful tips, and actually they are tips that I've always been saying to students, but now it's kind of like, don't just believe me and the other tutors. This is, you know, factual, knowledge-based research that talks about how you get it from that short term into your medium term memory. Now, if we understand that, we can then get the right revision techniques going on when we are spending our all-important time revising, okay, for the exams. So let's go through. So to start off with, what I just want to reiterate to you as students is you have to first of all accept that when you are asking yourself to learn something new, and if you think about, you know, AAT is often the starting point for people's careers within finance, you are going to have to do a significant amount of new learning. And that's not just going to be from an exam point of view, but it's also going to be, you know, at work as well, particularly if there is anyone out there that is career changing into finance. And you have to appreciate that the way our brains work, it will be difficult, right? And because it is difficult, you will probably have some setbacks along the way. Now, what's really important is about how you change your mindset towards this revision, or this learning, I think is a better phrase to actually talk about here. That those setbacks, they are not signs of failure. Okay, so you're maybe doing a past exam question on accruals and you don't get it right. Right? What you should be focusing on is the fact of the effort that you are putting in by having a go at that accruals question. And it's not going to come naturally. It's not going to be super easy because you've never done accruals before. You don't even know what one of those are, you know, one of those is. And it's significant new learning. And for that learning to change your brain, and hence for it to enter into that medium term memory, you have to appreciate that it's going to require effort, right? And basically, if it's not requiring effort, you're not learning anything. So it's really important to have the right mindset. And I think, yeah, this applies, it doesn't apply just to exams, you could apply it to your whole life as well, couldn't you guys? Now, if you think you can do something, you're more likely to be able to do it. And if you turn around and say, well, I can't pass that exam, no, you can't. No, it's not going to happen then. You've got to really change that mentality, right? One, it's going to be hard. You know, and if it's not hard, you're not learning anything. It's about the effort that you put in that counts, because the more it feels like it's effort, the more it's changing that brain to get it into your medium or long-term memory, and having the right positive attitude towards it. And I'm sure, say, some of you went on like the motivation session today that was running, and they would have probably talked around those type of ideas too. And what you need to think about, okay, is you need to think about this idea of striving towards your learning goal rather than this idea of performance. Right? So studies show that people with performance goals, so it's all about this, you know, I'm going to make sure that I get 70% or 80%, those performance goals unconsciously will limit your potential. So if you focus on validating or showing off your ability, you will only ever pick challenges that you are confident that you can meet. But if your goal is to increase your ability, so it might be, rather than my goal being my performance goal, you know, setting a performance goal of I will get 70% in the level 3 advanced bookkeeping, you could unconsciously be limiting your potential at level 4. You could unconsciously be limiting your potential as a financial accountant within your longer term career. So you need to set your goal on your ability. You know, so if your goal is to increase your ability, then you will pick ever increasing challenges, and you'll interpret any setbacks as useful information that just helped sharpen your focus on that topic area, and you'll get more creative and work harder. So if your goal is more about where you want to achieve your long-term career, and you want to learn how to be an effective finance director, then if along the way, when it comes to one of your exams on the journey, right, you will be focusing on making sure that you do that to the absolute best of your ability, rather than just scraping through, which is what some people do. They also talked about the idea that if you think about the idea of praise, so the kind of like how well you're doing, praise has the power to shape the way people respond to challenges. So it might be you're talking about one of your junior members of staff who's doing some exams, not just yourself. It might be for us as tutors thinking about, you know, helping students. But research talks about praise needs to be based on the effort that someone puts in, rather than necessarily just the performance goal. Right? The power to increase your ability lies within yourself and your own control. So the big thing there is about thinking about the word effort, but then we need to make sure that we're putting the effort in the right place. So let's have a look at some other bits. Revision techniques, learning. Now, the best and most effective way, or one of the most effective ways to learn something new and to get it into your medium-term memory, is through what's called retrieval practice. So it's getting it out of the brain, not thinking about putting it into the brain. Okay, so bear with me. So what do I mean by the term retrieval practice when it comes to revision? Right. We're talking here about quizzing yourself, not spending that effort reading. We're using things like quizzes and questions to identify our areas of weakness. Otherwise, how do you truly know what you are weak at unless you have tested yourself upon it? And the harder those quizzes are, the harder the questions are, the harder you find it, the greater the benefit will be when it comes to getting it in the medium-term memory, which we need for synoptic, we need for our longer-term careers as well. And it's appreciating that studies show making errors, it's okay. It's actually good for you. Right? However, what does our intuition tell us to do? And this is the problem. All right, you're there at home and you've got a couple of hours tonight to revise. What's your intuition, your natural stance going to be? What are you going to want to do? Oh, it feels good, doesn't it, to read the course notes, to read the study manual, get your highlighter out, yeah, and sit there for a couple of hours colouring in. Because Rereading it feels like learning, doesn't it, guys? It feels comfortable. It feels like you've achieved something because you've coloured in your course notes. Why is it better to spend those 2 hours, and maybe it doesn't need to be as much as 2 hours, maybe half an hour or an hour would be more effective? Why is doing the self-quizzing, the task bank, the question bank, the past exam questions, the green light test on AAT, there's plenty available, guys. You could write your own quizzes as well. Why is retrieval practice, self-testing, quizzing, why is that better than colouring in? The more we reread something, the greater you are giving to yourself this illusion of having knowledge. Okay, so you create this little bubble. Well, I've read that several times. Look at all those areas I've highlighted. You create this illusion that you know it. The only reliable measure of how do you know it is by doing some kind of question practice. Okay, this book, okay, Making It Stick, it wasn't about purely passing exams. It was about, you know, more than that, and, you know, learning. You know, it might be you want to learn a new language because that was one of your, you know, things that you wanted to do personally, to, you know, when you go on holiday, to be able to speak that language. It's no good rereading the book about how to learn French. You've got to test yourself on, can you remember how to ask for the all-important glass of wine? You know, you need to test that. Quizzing and testing and questions is the only reliable measure, because you're recalling that information, and it takes more effort to take it out of the brain than it does to put it in. The putting it in is reading it. Taking it out is what secures it into your actual memory. However, you can see there one of my pictures of someone getting a little bit stressed, because the problem is, when we do retrieval practice, which is question practice, which is doing quizzes, doing past exam papers, how does it feel? Do you get it all right first time, guys, when you do it? If the answer is yes, you're on the wrong level. You need to stretch yourself and get going quicker. How does it feel? It feels not very nice. It feels frustrating, because you look at the question and go, I don't know where to start. I've got it wrong. I can't remember, I don't feel confident enough. I'm getting bits of it wrong as I mark it. It feels less productive. Whereas highlighting, oh, this is, oh, look how much I've got through, look how many chapters I've got through. So you're fighting against the nice exercise of highlighting and rereading, or maybe just sitting there listening to an online lecture. It's cosy. Yeah? Whereas doing question practice, doing quizzes, it's not very nice. It's hard. It feels frustrating. However, this is what you need to remember. Every time you ask your brain to work hard, and it is hard work to try and recall something, to remember it without the book. Yeah, that's where I would start, Claire. Yeah, without the book, it's going to be hard. Right. I'll talk about some other techniques in addition to this as well, which you may want to do first before you do your retrieval practice. But every time you're having to do those questions on your own, yeah, to recall that memory, you are strengthening it, and the ability, and therefore you're strengthening the ability to be able to recall it again in the future. Yeah. Lex is actually talking about a good technique there in the chat box about rewording things in her own words. Absolutely, I've got that coming up on a slide later on about other techniques that are really useful for getting things into your long-term memory. The problem is the other techniques, you have to do the retrieval practice in addition to those. You know, the #1 studies that are shown is this retrieval practice will be the most effective way to make something stick. Right? Now, it then goes on to talk about research around spacing out your retrieval practice. So thinking about when you're going to be doing it and how often you should do this. And it could just be a quick 10 things that you can, 10 ratios you could remember, or 3 things you can remember about how you record inventory valuation, or a quick 10-minute test on, everything you can brain dump about break-even analysis. So it doesn't have to be hours and hours. So what we're talking about here then is when should you do it and spacing it out. So what does this mean? How can you use a spaced out retrieval practice as a study strategy? So when you're planning your revision timetable and when you're planning your revision studies, what you want to try and build in is quizzing at different time intervals. Now, ideally, that quizzing that you should do the question practice should link to prior learning. So it might be the case that you have just, studied, just attended a lecture where it's on, I don't know, inventory valuation, FIFO, LIFO, if anyone's done that stuff. What you then need to think about is, well, I've just gone through the lectures on it. Let's do some quizzing on that topic now, because it should be fresh and you should be able to hopefully answer those questions. Yeah, and you've just learned that stuff. So let's have a go at quizzing it. Then you need to set up on your timetable to go back to that topic. So it might be the case you've done inventory valuation in your Monday's lesson. What you need to factor in is do some more quizzing on inventory valuation, maybe on Wednesday and maybe on Friday. And if you're getting it all correct, leave it a bit longer then, leave it a week, and then come back and have a look at some of those questions. Even if you've already done them already, if there's a space between it, it allows you time to forget it a little bit, right? And if you've forgotten it a little bit, your brain has to work a little bit harder to recall it. And remember, we want effort. We want it to be effort. There wants to be effort in our work so that it goes from that short term to medium term. The other thing that you could think about is also alternating between study topics. So let's say that you've got to the end of your unit that you're studying. So maybe you've got to the end of management, accounting, costing. And if anyone's done that, there's a lot of different topics in that management, accounting, costing. So I'm not saying necessarily that you need to study costing at the same time as advanced bookkeeping. Costing is big enough as it is. But what you want to do is alternate between doing maybe some question practice on break even, and then maybe doing a few questions on the costing methods, like your marginal absorption costing. So rather than spend, if you've got an hour of time or 2 hours of time, rather than spend it all on one topic, maybe alternate between the two. Maybe do half an hour of one, half an hour of another. Because it just kind of is spacing out that retrieval. Now, what's your intuition going to tell you to do? It's always the problem, isn't it? What do we naturally going to want to do? A lot of people find it very difficult, the idea of doing retrieval practice in the first place and also spacing it out, right? And they fail to appreciate that single-minded, repetitive practice only actually comes from your short-term memory. So yeah, it might get you through that forthcoming exam, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, if you've got an exam in a couple of days' time, you could just sit down and drill yourself and feel as though you're burning it into your memory. You'll probably get through that exam. But when it comes to the synoptic 6 months later or 9 months later, it won't be there anymore. Okay, you cannot actually burn something into your medium-term memory through sheer repetition alone. Why is this better then? Why should we be looking at the question practice that we're doing it in shorter chunks, spaced out, and maybe alternating it between different topic areas within the subject that we are studying at that one time? So as I mentioned before, you actually want to allow yourself just to forget a little bit of it, not completely, but it just allows a little forgetting to happen. And therefore, when you go back to that area again, so maybe it's been a week since you've done anything on absorption costing. So rather than just doing absorption costing all the day before the exam, you're going to spread it out over a 4-week period or a 3-week period up to the exam. Now, each time that you leave that little gap and then you come back to it again, effort is required, which is good. It's a good thing. You have to work harder to then reconstruct what you'd already studied. And by doing that, you're reloading it from long-term memory. Now, your issue is, how does this feel? cramming. Yeah, we've all done it. Okay, hands up. Yeah, I've done it as well. Yeah, it's quite stressful. Okay, it got me through, but very stressful. And actually, can I remember some of that stuff? No. Just, you know, it's like you come out of the exam and think, oh, I've forgotten everything now. Don't know. I didn't have synoptics to do. I didn't have to worry about it. I could get away with it. Right? And that's the issue, that cramming, and we know we've all done it, it feels quite productive. Whereas spacing out your practice over time, it feels more difficult. You actually have to plan, you have to get ahead. Right? You can't leave it to the day before. You've actually got to have a plan in place, and that plan should be from day one of when you start. So when you start that unit and pick up the notes, you should be thinking, right, once I've had my lecture on whichever topic it is, how am I then going to space out the retrieval practice between that point and my real exam? So it will feel more difficult, but as you reconstruct that learning from your long-term memory, right, as awkward and as horrible as it feels, it will help to strengthen your understanding of that subject, right, and get it into your longer term memory, which will be needed, to say, when you're looking at things like synoptic exams. But greater than that, having a more in-depth understanding that's in your long-term memory should hopefully help you in your longer term careers as well as finance professionals. But they are the only revision techniques that you can use, but they are seen as some of the most effective revision techniques when it comes to that, say, all-important medium-term memory. Right? You know, my son's, bless him, we live in Essex, so he's having to do the 11 plus, a really, really tough exam. You know, he's having to do lots and lots of question practice, and I totally get it. When you do it and you get it wrong, it's very natural to think, I'm failing at it. But you've got to think all of that effort that you're putting on, the learning from your mistakes, and it can even be simple things. I know I would do this myself. I won't read dates properly. Now, I know now that I don't read dates properly, and I'll just forget there's 6 months and I've got to prorate something that's for a year. But I only know that that's my issue because I've done lots of question practice. So now when I go into any accrual or prepayment question, the first thing I do is look at what's the year end and what date are we looking at this invoice covering. And if I hadn't done that retrieval practice and that quizzing, those questions, it would have been too late for me to realise that actually is where your issue is. Okay? So you only know that through that retrieval practice. But there are other techniques that you can use as well in addition to the retrieval practice. And some of them have actually kind of been mentioned, some people have shared in the chat box. So hopefully as we go through this, it's just reassuring the revision you're doing is right, you've got the right technique, you're on the right lines. So the first one is about the idea of elaboration. So I just put the sort of fancy definition there. So it's basically the process of finding additional layers of meaning in the new material that you study. So what might this be? So can you relate the material to anything that you already know? So could you link it maybe when you're calculating depreciation, for example? Is that something you do at work? And can you relate what you've learned in theory to what you're doing in the workplace? I sometimes say to students, things like when you're doing calculations for accumulated depreciation, you've got cost less accumulated depreciation. When you do things like doubtful debts, that's actually very similar because you've got the asset of receivables and then you're reducing the value of those receivables. So if you can find any kind of like tenuous links to other things that you do know, then those tenuous links are going to help it get into the longer term memory. So as you're going through the material, you know, someone already put, I like to put it into my own words. Absolutely, you know, do you make your own notes from the materials that you're using, and do you put them into your own language about how it relates to you? And the best, you know, I do think one of the best ways, again, of really testing, do you understand something, is can you teach somebody else? Can you explain that technique to somebody else? Yeah. Your lucky husband, someone there. I bet they are loving it, aren't they? Yeah, and yeah, really good point. Actually, I'm quite a curious person, someone's put, and I like to see how that relates to the real world, which is fantastic. That's the right type of method that's going to help cement it into that medium-term, long-term memory. Yeah. It might be the case that you can link it to, you know, have your own metaphor around it, or a visual image that you can use that helps trigger or remember that. I'm sure we can send the slides out. Yeah, that's not a problem. I will do, guys. Yeah. So actually, a few people are saying in the chat box, well, yeah, I kind of do this already. And I actually found when I was going through the research, I didn't really, in some ways, learn anything new. It's what we'd always been, you know, teaching people to do. But it's not just from us. It's, you know, it's a lot of research that shows this works. And I know for me personally, my first step would actually be to do elaboration, and then I would do my retrieval practice as part of it. And actually the process of writing out my own, you know, bullet point summaries of the key topics, a lot of that would then get stuck in here. And then I would suddenly remember a lot of the key detail by going through that process. And then when it came to doing my retrieval practice, my question practice, I could do the questions, or I couldn't do them all, don't get me wrong, right? But you need to make mistakes to get better. And I actually found by doing that, it was a really good, effective technique. So that's elaboration. So trying to think about explaining it, teaching it to somebody else, making your own notes, right, putting it into your own world, right, any of that kind of linking to things will help you, right, in terms of getting it into your medium-term memory. Then we've got another technique here. It can't be used for everything. I think it tends to be, for me, a little bit more in terms of workplace, because remember, learning needs to happen at work, not just to pass exams. This is where you're attempting to answer the question or solve a problem before being actually shown how to do it. So this is the idea that if you want to get things into your medium and long-term memory, what can be quite effective is to learn by doing it. Okay? So this is what's referred to as experimental learning. So it's not going to work all the time for doing an exam, but can work in some situations. So for example, you know, when I teach break-even analysis, I never teach people this is the formula. I don't explain it to them. I give them a scenario first of all about, I'm setting up a business. This is how much it's going to cost me to hire the room. This is how much the teacher's going to be. This is how much I'm going to charge. Can you work out for me how many people I need to get in that room so I don't make a loss? So I would actually get my students to kind of work through logically how they would do that, and then tell them, well, actually what you've done is this formula here. So it can be when you're learning something that you almost have to have a go at something yourself rather than just being told what to do. So you might, if you ever wonder when you're in class or if you're doing live lessons, why as teachers we might not just tell you how to do everything, that's because generation is an effective learning technique. So I can't do it with everything with accountancy, but I know when I teach there are certain little areas where actually I'll just pose a question to the class and say, solve this problem. And then they won't actually realise by solving that problem, they've learned how to do break-even analysis. Okay? So yeah, exactly. Depends how out there the question is, someone has said. So it's not like, oh my God, this is the only way to learn. These are just other strategies. I say for me, generation works in some situations, but it's not perfect for everything. Yeah. Right, but remember, making errors, someone said, you know, I feel like I'm failing otherwise if it's too hard. Making errors and it being effort, it requiring effort is good for you. All right. Otherwise, if it's too easy, you'll never achieve your full potential. I do like this a lot. I think reflection is a really important tool. So you can be using this as in addition to your retrieval practice. So when you do that mock exam or you do those questions from the task bank or you answer your own quiz that you've written yourself, okay, so you can write your own quiz questions, that's not a bad thing in addition to all the material that's out there, is once you've gone through that question practice and you've looked at where you've gone wrong, it's going to happen. Okay, if you are getting it all right, your questions are too easy. Yeah, you need to jump up to the next level. So it's really important, as I put there, just to take a little bit of time to review what's happened when you've done that question practice and ask yourself, okay, what's gone well? Because remember, the only way to truly know if you know something is to test yourself. That's what the AAT is doing, isn't it, in their real exam? You know, how do I know that you guys really know what you're doing? You must sit a real exam, but you need to do that process before that real exam. Things will go well. So what bits did go well? Right? What bits could go better? Okay. Are there any other bits of knowledge or experience that remind you of? So again, it's a little bit like, remember, these techniques can also be used in the greater, wider world in your career. So if you're maybe doing, I don't know, a month-end report for the first time, does that remind you of any sort of situations that you've had before? So in terms of, you know, did you work well towards that deadline or not? So it's all about kind of what can you learn from that experience that you've just had, and then what do you need to do to get more masterful at the subject? So what do we still need to learn to get better at it? So it might be the case you've done a whole mock exam, task 1 and 2 have gone really well, but task 3 you've struggled with, maybe it's accruals and prepayments, it's got loads of dates in it, you know you've had issues with dates before in maybe other studies, so what can you do to get better at not getting those dates wrong? You know, you're going to write it down on your scrap bit of paper maybe. Such a shame when it's online exams you can't circle and highlight and go, don't forget the date. Can't do that on screen, but you have got scrap paper, so you could always do that too. So when you're setting up your revision timetable, what you need to do is you need to factor in that time for reflection. So if you say to yourself, right, I'm going to do a task that's 20 marks, I'd normally get 20 minutes in the exam to do it, so I'm going to do my elaboration first. I've written all my notes, you know, about the topic area, I've tried to explain it to somebody else or just explained it to my cat. Now I'm going to do the questions on it. 20 minutes. I would probably add in my timetable at least another 50% on top of that, so at least another 10 minutes to then have the time to work through it, look at where you've gone wrong. Have you understood where you've gone wrong? And if you don't understand where you've gone wrong and you are part of a college, you know, whether you're part of First Intuition or a different college, it's at that point there where if you've got a tutor, use them. That's what they're there for. And that's the point where you need to say, actually, I can't work out why I've gone wrong. Now, if you can't work out why you've gone wrong, it's not going to help you in terms of your memory. That's where you need to then reach out to get help. Okay. So you've got to factor that in. So I might factor in half an hour or maybe 40 minutes for that topic area to do the question, to mark it, work out where I've gone wrong, and basically write myself a couple of learning outcomes maybe from it, and thought, right, well, what have I got wrong? I didn't read the question, or I can't calculate straight line depreciation, you know, whatever it is. Go away, work on that area and make a note. You've got to do a question on that again later. So if you didn't do your straight line depreciation right on your timetable, make sure in 2-3 days time you do another little question on it. Okay. And you might have to have a fluid, flexible timetable about what you're going to cover on each of those areas. So it's really important to try and take that time to reflect. What would you do differently next time? So I'm having some fun dealing with a 10-year-old. I'm trying to educate to pass an exam. Don't try and teach your own children, guys. They don't like to listen to their own parents, right? Even though I know what I'm telling him is exactly all of this, but he doesn't want to listen to me. I'll have to get him to listen to the recording. Right, what are the techniques? Calibration. Okay, thinking, what is that? What is that? So this is again reiterating that you need to make sure that the work you're doing when you are revising, when you're learning something new, is giving you objective feedback, honest feedback. Okay. So quizzes and practice tests, absolutely, they will help you see what you know and what you don't know. And this is where it's then going to be really important to actually answer the questions. Now, of course I'm going to answer the questions if I'm if I'm doing some retrieval practice, Kelly, won't I? How many times have you got to a question, thought, oh, no, I can't really bother. Well, no, I can't be bothered, but I don't know. This looks a bit hard. Oh, I'll flick to the back where the answer is. I'll have a little look at, yeah. I knew that. Yeah, I would have got that right. Yeah, that's fine. Anyone ever done that? Thought, well, actually, what I'll do is I'll look at questions and I'll audit the answer. And you go, oh yeah, I would have got that in the exam. Yeah. You know, you have a few people saying yes, right? When we're talking about question practice and retrieval practice, you need to have objective feedback. Now that means you on your own at some point have to have a go at answering the questions. So that means as part of your revision, there has to be that almost, I would say, exam conditions type situation, right? Where you have to build that into your study planner, into your revision, that you are going to sit down without your notes, without being able to flick to the back, yeah, without having the AAT sample assessment on one screen and the AAT answers on the other. No, you need to have had that opportunity to have answered them on your own, because if you don't, and just go, yeah, I would have got that. Because if you cannot supply an answer, or you don't make yourself supply an answer, you are falsely getting into this bubble of the illusion of mastery of the subject. Okay? It will give you an illusion of knowing. Now, where do I see this even more so? Level 4 and beyond, when people have to write, when they've actually got to write an answer. It's quite fun using a calculator, so you spend all your time doing the numbers ones, or write 5 sentences or 5 marks worth explaining, I don't know, explaining the risks, or explaining why the budget is wrong. That's a bit of effort, that is. I don't look at, yes, I would definitely put that in my answer. Yeah, I would have written all of that. You know, you've done it. And that's why I've got my little cat, weird little illusion that's going on with that cat photo in there. Because if you're doing that, you're creating this illusion that you know what you're doing. You don't. The only way you truly know is by doing those questions on your own. So I see it more with written papers. So again, if you are part of a training college, if you're part of FI, the FI family, if you're part of another training provider and you have got a tutor, use them. Right? Do the mocks that they set. Have a good go at it. Get that objective feedback. You're only cheating yourself, because the answers, didn't you know, they don't give them in the real exam. But I've been teaching for a long time. All right, I've seen the amount of times I've had students face to face in front of me. Let's have a go at this written question, guys. After 10 minutes, you walk around, and a significant proportion of them would have just flicked to the back. Just wasting your time. Right, you've got to make sure that you've done some of that objective work. Okay? It's hard, we don't like it. Good. It's like going to the gym, it's not very nice, but you only get fitter by getting out of breath. And then my final one is using mnemonic devices. And I'm sure some of you online might be able to share if you've got any cool mnemonics that you do use. So a mnemonic device, it's just any device where you are looking at using things like acronyms or other memory techniques. Now, the reason I've put a little picture of our elephant friend there is when you use things like pictures, often the image of an elephant is easier for people to remember than the word elephant and how it's spelt. Yeah, so if I was taking like a 3-year-old, for example, and I showed them the text elephant and a picture of elephant, it's going to be much easier for them to remember the picture than it is the word. But there are different things that you can use. So some people use acronyms. So it's like SMART, that's used for remembering SMART objectives. One for the financial accountants amongst us, people talk about PIRATE for remembering the capitalisation of development costs. If anyone's got any other acronyms that they use, chuck them in the chat box. So you might use things like that. But there are other techniques that you can use. Or don't get me started on bid maths. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's when acronyms can go slightly wrong, because you're right. All right. But I have an issue with my school that my son goes to, because they teach them bid maths, but they teach them so generically that they must do it in that order. There can be certain situations where you need to make sure that you understand it's your brackets and indices. That's fine. Any order, do that first. Multiplication, division, then add and subtract. But you need to remember that it goes across the page. Right, so there was a situation where the way they taught it would have meant they actually, because the subtraction came first, they would have done that before the, say, multiplication, and that would be wrong. So it just kind of, bid maths is good, but you've got to remember it also goes across the page too. So sometimes mnemonics can forget a second step, which is what that does. Look, Dave has got some fantastic maths club sessions. If you haven't joined maths club, make sure you do, because I remember he did a whole one on that and he was getting quite angry about the way the school had taught it too literally. Right, so that's the only problem with things like mnemonics, is sometimes it can almost be too literal and actually it doesn't give the full story. Yeah. Other techniques I say that are linked to these kind of ideas of mnemonics is there's other things, not just acronyms. So there's something called the PEG method, or rhyming. So this is where you need to create a tenuous link between a piece of knowledge and a picture. So you use the idea of 1, bun, you'd picture like a juicy bun. 2, you'd picture a shoe. 3, tree. 4, door. 5, hive. 6, stick. 7, heaven, etc. And then you have to create a tenuous link between that and the thing you need to remember. This is the problem with some of these mnemonic techniques. It actually creates, it's quite a lot of effort to create the mnemonic to then remember it. So for example, not that I don't teach, I say to people when they need to remember this pirate criteria, which you do at level 4 financial statements, about development costs being capitalised, you can learn it as pirate, but sometimes people can't remember what the P and the I stand for. So I'd come up with tenuous links between the letters and the pictures. So I won't go into all of it now. You'll have to join my my sessions on that. But 1 bun, for example, is I say to them, picture like a really juicy hot cross bun or Chelsea bun, and you're really hungry. So you've got a real intention to complete that bun. So you're really hungry. So the 1 bun is you're going to eat the bun up, and hence it's an intention to complete. Yeah. And we'll do 2 things like 3, tree. So we'd picture this really complex tree house that you built in your garden from this tree. And you have to picture, right, when I look at the tree, ooh, is it technically feasible to actually build that tree house? And that helps them remember technical feasibility. So with accountancy, the problem with pegging is that you need to find a tenuous link between the picture and an accounting list of rules that you're trying to remember. So again, it only works for certain things. Okay? So if you want to know more about that, if anyone's doing financial statements, stay at the end, and I'll explain my one bun, 2 shoe for remembering it. That's something that you can do. And the other one, which I personally haven't really tried, but I know has been quite successful, particularly by people, people who can like count cards, those like people with crazy memories, is they use something called the journey method. So again, the idea is you picture a journey and then you peg the ideas along the way. So it's all about this idea of using pictures to link to the knowledge that you need to learn. So you might picture your journey to work, right? And then you would maybe see something on your shop maybe that you always pass on your journey. How can you link that Pizza Express to something that you are trying to remember from accountancy? And then it might always be you pass the bus station. How do you remember the bus station? How does that link to something to do with your accountancy studies? So I just find, it might be fine for other techniques, but the difficulty with this is you've got to find a tenuous link between a picture of something and the accountancy term you're trying to remember. Now, if you can do that, when I've done that rhyming scheme with my classes before, that's it. They've gone out of that room and they've remembered it. And when I've tested them the next week, without having done any work, they can recall those 6 criteria about capitalising development costs. So it doesn't work for everything, but it can be a tool for some things. Okay. So they are my different tips. And there's a little reference there which comes from the book that has a lot of this research in. It's called Making It Stick, the Science of Successful Learning. So thank you very much to the authors of that. Some really interesting stuff that was in that book that just confirmed to me what we've always been telling you in terms of good, effective memory techniques. So thank you for joining, and I'll stop the recording now.